All right. Welcome everyone to our very first Aroma Explore the Wheel. Tonight we'll be talking about Tropical 1. And I'm just so excited that you all are joining me for this tonight. And I'm really happy that it's actually happening. This has been, an idea I've had for a while. And I'm just super excited that it's actually come to fruition. So a few things before we get started. You are all, of course, watching this on YouTube. If you have any questions or comments or just want to chat with some of the other people in attendance, you can use the chat box for that. And I will actually be able to see your comments and questions throughout. So just so you know, that's how you can communicate with each other and with me. And the first thing I want to do, and you'll have to give me a second, I'm just like between like 6 screens here. So like I said, I'm really excited that you all are here with me tonight, and I want to give you a couple of disclaimers before we get started. First, if you don't know who I am, I'm Jen Blair, and I'm a Mastered Cicerone and a National BJCP beer judge, and also the creator of Aroma Explore the Wheel. And before we get started, the disclaimers that I wanted to give you all is many of you know that I work full-time for the Cicerone certification program as their exam manager. So I just want to make very clear, this webinar series is not affiliated in any way with either the Cicerone certification program or the BJCP. This is a completely independent project of mine. And second, just due to the nature of my role at Cicerone, there may be some questions that I'm not able to answer just because there might be a conflict of interest for me. If that happens, I don't know that it really will, but if that happens, I'll do my best to provide you with the information that I can, and we'll go from there. So you know what, I'm actually on the wrong screen. That would explain why my slides aren't moving. All right. So the next thing before we get started, I want to make sure that you all are aware of our code of conduct tonight. If you have not had a chance to read it, you've got the link right there on your screen. So you all should have received this in the email that you got yesterday with the information about the webinar. I just want to kind of summarize this, the code of conduct. And really, it's like, just be cool, right? Don't be a dick. Like, that's pretty easy. But please make sure that you are not, sharing my work as your own, or, sharing videos, sharing links like this without my permission. Also, don't be mean to me in the chat, I guess. And the teaching materials, what we're going to talk about tonight, it's not like a top secret thing, but they should not be shared beyond this webinar unless expressly permitted by me in writing. And I made that sound like very big and important. If there's something that you're like, hey, can I show a screenshot of this? That's probably going to be fine, but please just ask me first. And of course, we want to have a harassment-free experience for everyone. So we're not going to tolerate harassment of myself or any other participants. And I've got a whole list of those examples of harassment, things that aren't going to fly for us, right? When we're in here. So if there is a violation of the code of conduct, that will result in you immediately being cut from the webinar, or you may be banned from participating in future webinars. So, like I said, I don't think it's going to be a problem. We can all just be good. If there is a code of conduct violation, you can email me at jen@underthegenfluence.beer. You all should have my email address. I also have a contact me form on my website. You can report something that way. And also, if there's something happening in the live chat, you can flag it there as well. So I'm assuming everyone is remaining on this webinar. So if you are remaining, you're agreeing to abide by this code of conduct. And one thing I want to make clear for all of you tonight is it's totally cool for me If you'd like to like screenshot what we're doing tonight or post about the webinar on social media, that's totally fine with me. In fact, I would love if you did it because it helps me like create more awareness for the series. And I would love also if you tagged me in it. I'm at Under the Genfluence. Of course, you don't have to. It's your social media. Do what you'd like. But that's just something that is totally cool with me tonight. If you want to post about this, hopefully you're going to have a blast and you're going to want to like show everybody how much of a blast you're having. So that's our code of conduct. The next thing I want to put up for you all, just so you can get started on this, the link that you see there is the link to our blind tasting form. And that I'm going to let you go ahead and get that kind of pulled up while I'm going through the session overview. So first we're going to start out with a blind smelling exercise, and then we're going to do a descriptive language exercise. So really kind of the first part of this webinar, you're going to be kind of working on your own. And then we'll move into the flavor discussion. We'll do a second blind smelling exercise. I will tell you at the end which vials have which aromas, and then we'll have Q&A. But like I said, if you have questions throughout the webinar, feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on that on my end, but if nothing else, I definitely have space at the end to answer your questions. So why are we starting with blind smelling when we haven't even talked about anything yet? Well, I'm glad you asked. So the purpose of these webinars, we want to build our expertise with various fruity aromas. So, for this beginning kind of section of the webinar, each month we're exploring different fruits that fall under that larger umbrella of fruity. Because fruity is an okay descriptor, but we can be better than that and be more specific. So with developing expertise, this happens, when we're moving from a lower level or lower state of competence to a higher one. And standardized testing, I promise this will make sense in a second, but standardized testing doesn't really accurately reflect what our potential is. Rather, it just kind of gives us a snapshot in time. It just gives us a static report of where we are at the time of this test. On the other hand, dynamic testing offers an assessment of where your knowledge is and how you can move forward toward an improvement. And for me, that is very important. And you'll hear me say this a lot throughout the webinar, that it's important to understand that your progress is not going to be linear. You're going to have some days when like you can smell everything, you're getting everything right, and then you're going to have other days where you're just like, what am I even doing here? I can't smell anything. I suck at this. I say this for my own personal experience. So just understand that, particularly doing things like blind smelling, blind tasting, it is a very vulnerable position that you're in. But the reason why we're doing dynamic tasting, why I'm having you start out with a blind smelling exercise right off the bat, is because it's going to focus you and me to a lesser extent on areas that need to be studied rather than areas of accomplishment, right? So let's say, for example, you're going in to take one of your Cicerone tasting exams, right? That's a static test. It's going to tell you kind of how you did. With dynamic testing, it's going to show you where you need some work. And that's totally fine. We all have areas that we can improve upon. And it also gives you the ability to measure your progress. So, maybe today you don't get any of them right, and then in a couple days you go back to your vials and smell them, and you get 3 right, you get 3 wrong, right? So you're able to see how you're progressing through that. And with dynamic testing, it has 4 goals. So first is determining the state of your expertise, and then it's refocusing your learning on areas of low performance. I am very guilty of this, where I like to study the things that I know I'm good at because I'm good at them, and I don't like to study the things I'm not good at because I'm not good at them. So doing something like dynamic testing is going to help you refocus on areas where you're going to be able to improve. With dynamic testing, you're also able to do follow-up testing to measure how you're improving. And again, you can redo it, it's going to refocus you, and that's going to keep raising your expertise. And I think it's really, kind of a universal human experience that we really learn a lot more when we fuck up, right? If you do something perfectly the first time, hey, that's great. But did you really learn anything? Do you have to go back and like look at your performance again? Maybe not. So that's kind of what is designed to have you feel vulnerable, kind of get outside of your comfort zone, and it's going to give you that assessment on where you are and how to move forward, and it helps you figure out where your weaknesses are and how you can improve on them. So our blind smelling exercise, this is how it's going to go. You will have 5 minutes to complete the exercise, and you're going to smell each vial individually. Each vial only has one aroma in it, and none of the aromas are repeated. So, like I mentioned at the very beginning, like you can probably guess by the title of this webinar, the aromas are going to fall under tropical fruit, right? So we've already kind of narrowed it down quite a bit for you. You can enter the aroma on the form, and like I mentioned, you have the form, the URL right there on the screen to get you to the form. And I just want you to enter the aroma. You're going to enter your blind number. You'll enter the vial number, take it from your pal Jen, to make sure that the lid is on before you check the bottom to see what the number is. Or just keep the lid on it, and then you don't have to worry about it until you actually open it. But you'll check the bottom for that 3-digit number, put that in the form, and then just enter what aroma you think it is. You don't have to worry. I'm not looking for like intensity or any kind of, like flowery description. You can just put in what you think the aroma is. And then when you're finished with the form, you're going to hit submit. So kind of frustratingly, I do have one more slide for you before we get started. And the purpose of this, we'll do this before each blind smelling in each webinar, but we're going to work on calming ourselves down, focusing on the task at hand. And what I'm going to do today, I will lead you through some of my routine. When I'm talking about my routine, this is what I do when I am setting down to do a blind tasting, or in this case, a blind smelling. And it helps with my nerves, right? And then it helps me focus on what it is that I'm doing. And so I will walk you through some of what I do. I encourage you to explore what works for you and what doesn't. The goal of establishing your own routine is not to do everything exactly the same way I do, is to give you space to figure out what works for you and practice that. And I want you to create a ritual that you perform at the beginning of each tasting session, whether it's doing practice panels at home, taking an exam, or judging a flight of beer. Your ritual should help calm your nerves, focus your mind, and signal to yourself that it's time to evaluate mindfully. And practicing this ritual each time is really going to help you zero in on the task at hand and keep you from getting distracted by external things in your environment, right? We're going to be like the little kind of Google guy, the Google Maps guy, where you pick him up by his arm and drag him over and drop him in. It doesn't matter where you're going to get dragged over and dropped into. You're going to do your routine, and that's going to help you just zone in really quickly. And there's a lot of things outside of our control when you're trying to test or taste mindfully that can throw you off your game if you're not focused. Like if you're in a high stress situation, like an exam, cakes are being dropped, delivery people are kind of Kool-Aid manning through the front door, or you have somebody who is repeatedly and loudly blowing their nose repeatedly. And that is a true story that has happened to me during exam. But if you have a routine that you do to help you focus, then those external factors aren't going to jolt you out of your concentration as much. So you'll find that developing this routine will help you feel calmer. You're going to have a clearer mind. You're going to have a more confident approach. So I have a picture of a lake here. I am neurodivergent and I am a water autistic. So that's kind of the joke. Like, are you a train autistic or a water autistic? I'm a water autistic. So calm waters, particularly lakes. I grew up going to lakes all the time. That's kind of my go-to relaxation visualization. And by that, I mean that when I'm doing this routine and I'm getting ready to start mindfully evaluating, I kind of picture myself on the shore of a very calm lake. And that's kind of, when I picture that, my brain's like, okay, I know where this place is. I know what we're doing here. So I will walk you through what I do and why. Feel free to deviate from that while you figure out what works best for you. I will go through a couple of breathing exercises, and then I'm just going to give us all about a minute to kind of do that, do that yourself. So for me, the very first step is releasing tension. So my first step is I relax my shoulders. My shoulders are usually right up here under my ears. I tend to be a very tense person. So I lower my shoulders, and then I'll also kind of roll them a few times. I get a little horrified at the amount of like cracks and crackles I hear when I do that, but it does help loosen me up. And it is important for you to release the tension that you can, because even if, you go in and you're like, I've got this, I'm so confident, but you're tense, your body's still going to signal to your brain that like there's anxiety, we're tense about something. So just, relaxing is going to be a great way to just release the tension, right? Give you one less thing to worry about. So I'll roll them a few times. I also tend to clench my jaw literally all the time. I unclench my jaw and I'll stretch my neck a little bit just to release some tension, especially with us. We're usually like staring forward at screens all day. So I like to do that, just kind of get that out a little bit. And I also like to do a really quick lat stretch. And I do that just touching my forearms together above my head. And when you do that, you get a really nice stretch kind of all the way down the side of your body, but it's going to help you release a lot of the tension. So I would recommend starting, and like I said, like this doesn't, your routine, I would also encourage you to do something that you're not going to feel self-conscious about if, like if you're in a situation where there's other people around. And, stuff like this, totally fine. That's not something that you probably will be self-conscious about. So then our next step, after we've kind of released some of that physical tension, is breathing. So breathing exercises have a lot of benefits. Namely, it's going to help you focus when you're stressed. It's going to ease any kind of worry or panic, and it's also going to decrease your blood pressure while increasing alertness. So our proper breathing technique, just kind of in life, is you, as much as possible, you want to be breathing through your nose, not your mouth. There's a lot of reasons for that. If you all have, an interest in talking kind of about our physiology and kind of what, like which nostril does what, we can totally do a segment on that in a future webinar. But you want to make sure you're breathing in through your nose as much as possible. And when you breathe in, a lot of us tend to breathe really shallowly. We breathe just right into our chest. When you're breathing in, I want you to breathe from your diaphragm first and then your lungs. And as you do this, you can kind of physically feel it, kind of just feel your breath filling up from your diaphragm up through your lungs. So as much as possible, right? We want to breathe from our diaphragm, breathe deeply, not just breathe shallowly in our chest. So the first technique I'm going to talk about is box breathing. And some of you may be familiar with this. So with box breathing, what you are going to do, you're going to inhale to a count of 4. You're going to hold your breath to a count of 4. You're going to exhale to a count of 6. And then you're going to pause at the bottom of that exhale for just like 1 beat before you start over again. And let me switch this really quickly so you all can see me. So what I'm going to do now, and I would encourage you to do this with me, we're going to do the box breathing. We'll do a couple of rounds of it. And obviously I can't box breathe and talk at the same time, so I'm going to try to count down with my hands, but when you're counting, it's whatever your count of 4 is, that's fine. So here we go. We're going to do a couple of rounds of our box breathing. So that's box breathing. And box breathing is really great to help you focus. It's the thing that like the Navy SEALs do, to like help them fall asleep anywhere at any time kind of thing. So that's box breathing. The next one I'm going to show you is alternate nostril breathing. So this is going to be breathing in and out through one nostril with the other nostril closed and then swapping. If you've taken a yoga class before, you've probably done this. If you would like to do this exercise the yoga way, you're going to take your thumb, put it on your right nostril, your index finger and middle finger are going to go up here on your third eye. Your ring finger is going to go on the other nostril. You can also just use your fingies however you want. I tend to do that, just whatever's comfortable for you. So what we do when we're doing alternate nostril breathing is we're going to, let me get my hands figured out. We're going to close one nostril, inhale, and then switch nostrils, close the other one, and exhale. And then inhale again, switch, exhale. So when you're switching, you want to switch on the exhale. So your new nostril, the first thing it's going to do is exhale. So let's do just a couple of rounds of that to practice. And also with alternate nostril breathing, it really works well to help kind of activate your parasympathetic system. And our nostrils are really interesting. You may or may not believe that I can talk for a long time about what our nostrils do, but basically your right nostril is the gas pedal and your left nostril is the brake. So when you're alternating between them, you're kind of, you're getting that focus going, you're lowering your anxiety, you're tapping into more of your parasympathetic side. So let's do just a couple of rounds of alternate nostril breathing. So I'm going to breathe in, switch nostrils, breathe out, breathe in, switch, breathe out. So that's alternate nostril. I tend to do alternate nostril when I'm going into any kind of like tasting or, like I said, mindfully evaluating. So I would encourage you to, like I said, figure out something that's going to work for you. And then the last step, which is usually what I'm doing while I'm doing the breathing technique, is just focusing and visualizing. So think about what your intention is as you are, getting ready to start whatever mindful evaluation you're doing. For me, what I will say the most for my intentions is I am mindfully and deliberately evaluating a blind sample to determine its tropical fruit aroma. That's something that I'll think to myself. It just helps me, like, what are we doing here? And then also, kind of visualize how you're going to assess each sample. So maybe not so much with our vials tonight, but if you are in like an exam situation, you want to think like, I'm going to like write down my off flavors first or whatever, right? So you just want to visualize, how is this going to go? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give all of us about a minute to kind of practice whatever routine. And with the exception of me, nobody can see you. I would imagine nobody can see you. You're at least not doing it on YouTube like I am. So I'm going to give us about a minute to kind of go through whatever routine where we need to go through before we start the blind smelling exercise. So take a minute, do your stretches, do your breathing, focusing, visualization. All right, so I would encourage you to kind of wrap up, come on back. Hopefully, you weren't just sitting there watching me forget which side I was supposed to be on while I was trying to do that. So, we're going to get started. I'm going to put our instructions up there. I'm going to take our blind tasting link. Hopefully, you all are already there. Relax your shoulders. You've got 5 minutes. And I want you to smell each vial. Make sure when you go to the form that you enter the number on the bottom of the vial and just put in like one word. Okay. So, like it says on here, do your best. We're looking for progress, not perfection. So, go ahead and take 5 minutes and fill out your form. All right, so go ahead and wrap up if you haven't already wrapped up, and we're going to move on. So hopefully that was pretty good for everyone. Sorry, you're going to have to wait for maybe like another 45 minutes before I tell you what you were smelling, but maybe you already know, so you don't need me to tell you. So the next thing I want us to do is going to be a descriptive language exercise. And I like doing exercises like this because it shows you that you likely have a larger descriptive vocabulary than it feels like you do. And I first did this exercise after the second time I took the Master Cicerone exam because when I was writing like consumer descriptions of things, I wanted to use a description more specific than like herbal, for example. But in that exam environment, I did not do my routine before this, so I was definitely affected by that. But in that exam environment, my brain could only come up with bay leaf and tarragon. So everything I tasted, if I thought it was herbal, I just wrote bay leaf and tarragon. And even at the time, I was frustrated because it was like, I know that I can do better than this. So I was just rewriting bay leaf and tarragon over and over. So I sat down one day and just wrote down as many herbs and spices as I could think of. And then I literally just Googled lists of herbs and spices and just went through and filled in any that I hadn't already written down. And I actually did the same thing with flower descriptions. So I wouldn't keep saying like rose or carnation, I knew I could do better than that. So this is a really simple, accessible exercise that I encourage you to do to help expand your descriptive language vocabulary. And just do it with anything. If you're like me and you find yourself thinking like, okay, I need to have more herbs and spices like at the ready, just sit down with that one category and just brainstorm. So what we're going to do now is, if you've got a pen and paper, notes app, somewhere where you can write this down. This is only going to be 3 minutes. And I want you just to write as many tropical fruits as you can. And you don't need to worry about like a descriptor, is it like fresh cherry pie or something like that? No, you can just write down just a list of fruit, right? And if you're unsure of whether a fruit is tropical, just write it down anyway. And, maybe you'll find out later that it is a tropical fruit or it's not. So I'm going to, again, I'll give you all 3 minutes and I just want you to brainstorm, write down as many tropical fruits as you can think of. And hopefully this is going to be a little less nerve wracking than the blind smelling exercise. So I'm going to let you all get started. That's going to be our 3 minutes with our descriptive language exercise. I hope that that was beneficial for you, even if you can only think of like 2 tropical fruits. Just kind of getting in that mindset. And like I said, I would really encourage you, particularly if you're trying to develop your descriptive vocabulary, just take some time to do something like we just did. And like I said, first is I think it's going to make you realize that you have a bigger library than you think you do. And also, it's again, this is a dynamic testing kind of situation. You're just writing down what you know, and you're going to see areas where you may need to improve. So now we're going to move on to our flavor discussion. And the way I'm going to do it today is there is one compound that we're going to talk about specifically, but since we're talking about tropical fruit, it's going to be more general, because as I started going through like each tropical fruit, it's like, well, these all kind of come from the same place. So this isn't going to be like this flavor is this flavor is this, but we'll get to that. So what I like to do is, think about like, well, what is a tropical fruit? What's considered a tropical fruit? And I will tell you all, I am learning a lot about fruit just by trying to figure out like what's an apple. So a fruit is tropical if it grows in a warm, humid climate between the tropics of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. So if you kind of, I think most of us are probably familiar with the concept of the equator and the tropic regions, subtropical regions. But just imagine if you're looking at a map of the world, just kind of right through the middle, those are going to be tropics. So this includes Central and South America, the Caribbean, Asia, Africa, and parts of Australia. So the next thing I want to note is just language. So, I've learned or I've seen a lot, and I understand, maybe times change and everything, but a lot of times when we're talking about hops from New Zealand or Australia or South Africa, they're called New World hops. And I would encourage you to avoid Euro-colonial language as much as possible, like New World versus Old World, because it's like, well, new to who, right? Old to who? Indigenous cultures have been around for thousands of years, right? And new to white people does not mean new to everyone. So I would encourage you, as you're kind of talking, I guess, casually about hops in conversations, that instead of saying New World hops, just say like New Zealand hops or Australian hops. One, it's more correct, right? Our descriptive language is very specific if we say that. And two, we're just kind of moving away from that kind of language. And actually, the Court of Master Sommeliers this past year removed the terms New World and Old World from their materials. So just a note. So many of our tropical fruit flavors that aren't actual fruit additions in beer are going to come from hop oils and thiols. And thiols are a subset of hop oils. So you can see here we have this cross section of a hop. And what we're most interested in for today's webinar is the lupulin gland. So all of that kind of gold yellow powder that you see, that's what we're really interested in. So our lupulin glands are going to contain our hard resins, our soft resins, our hop oils, and our polyphenols. And our hard and soft resins are going to contribute to the bitterness of the beer. And the hop oils are really that key contributor to aroma and flavor. And hop oil chemistry is not as well understood as bitterness chemistry is. And for me, I think this makes sense, because if you think about who has funded the bulk of beer research, over the past however many years, most of that funding, actually, I would argue like 99% of that funding is coming from large industrial breweries. Those breweries are making a product that is, consistent on a massive scale. It's also very low in flavor. So it kind of follows that there's not going to be that much research into hop oils and hop flavors that provide a range of distinctive and noticeable flavors, just because for a very long time that's not what beer was. So there are some things in beer that, like, I'm always surprised to learn, hey, like, the jury is still out on some of this stuff. We don't have this nailed down, and our hop oil chemistry is one of them. So our hop essential oils are going to account for anywhere from 0.5 of our hop mass up to 3% in some varieties. And I'm going to refer back to this quite a bit, just because it blows my mind as I was doing the research for this. So just keep in mind that our hop essential oils, 0.5% to 3%. So like if I told you you have 0.5 to 3% chance of surviving this webinar, like that's not, there's not a lot of positivity there for you, right? I promise this isn't going to be like the ring or anything, but just keep in mind, like that is very, very small. That's just such a small amount. So the interesting thing about hop oils as well is they occur, a lot of them will occur below our individual perception thresholds, but it is a case of, you know, the sum is greater than the parts, and synergistically they might be individually, they might be below threshold, but synergistically they can create these distinctive aromas. And a lot of our hop essential oil aroma is going to be kind of below that individual perception level. So we're going to talk about hop essential oils. There's this very cool graph. This is from Scott Janish. And we're going to dive into the essential oils, which is going to lead us right into talking about thiols. So there are three major classes of hop oils. We have hydrocarbons, oxygenated hydrocarbons, and sulfur-containing hydrocarbons. So let me see, there we go. I just need to make sure I'm actually clicking on the right thing. There we go. Okay, so hydrocarbons are going to account for most of our hop essential oils. They're going to be 40 to 80%. And our four major hydrocarbons are going to be myrcene, humulene, caryophyllene, and farnesene. So our hop essential oils are very volatile. They're rarely going to survive in their original form in the boil. So some that you are probably familiar with, or we can talk about some of the flavors. Hydrocarbons includes monoterpenes. That's going to give us spicy and herbal flavors. So that's going to be like myrcene, our alpha and beta pinene. And then we have our sesquiterpenes. And these are going to be more of a woody flavor. So beta farnesene, alpha humulene. And our hydrocarbons are going to react with oxygen during storage and also boiling to create our next class of hop oils, which is oxygenated hydrocarbons. So our oxygenated hydrocarbons make up about 30% of our hop oils. They're more soluble than hydrocarbons, so they're more likely to survive the brewing process. Those are going to include our terpene alcohols, such as linalool, geraniol. I think most of us are probably familiar with those. And they're also, our oxygenated hydrocarbons are made up of alcohols, aldehydes, acids, ketones, epoxides, and esters. So then our last group of essential oils are our sulfur-containing hydrocarbons. And you may not believe this, but a sulfur-containing hydrocarbon happens when a hydrocarbon combines with a sulfur. So that's how we get our sulfur-containing hydrocarbons. And with these, they have very, very low flavor thresholds, which means that we can detect them in very small amounts. And their formation is going to be accelerated by heat, but most will break down or evaporate during the boil. So that's an important part that we're going to talk about in a bit, is during the boil, these sulfur-containing compounds will get boiled away. And that's why if we're looking to kind of free some of the thiols that are going to be in these sulfur-containing hydrocarbons, we don't want to add them to the boil because they're just going to volatilize away. So our sulfides are produced by the degradation of protein. Most of them are going to smell like, let me go back one more slide, sorry. Most of them are going to smell like cabbage, rotten vegetables, onions. So we also have within our sulfur-containing hydrocarbons, we have sulfides, thioesters, and thiols. So the sulfides are going to be the ones that you're probably familiar with. So that's going to be the sulfurous smells of the cabbage and the boiled vegetables. And the thioesters are formed by alpha acids, and they likely result from fatty acid metabolism. And like sulfides, they're considered a negative flavor in beer. So our first two classes, we really don't want these flavors in the beer. The one that we're really interested in is our polyfunctional thiols. Those are going to be desirable in beers because of their tropical fruit flavors, like intense fruit flavors. And when you're thinking about sulfur-containing hydrocarbons, as I know many of us do, you're already actually probably familiar with some of them. So DMS, H2S, 3-MBT, Lightstruck, and mercaptan. Those are all sulfur-containing hydrocarbons. So if you think about the way those smell, right, they're that kind of that cabbage, just sort of like not a great aroma. So with our polyfunctional thiols, we're going to talk about our next major source of tropical fruit flavors in beer. So it's really interesting as I was, researching and getting ready for this webinar. I like looking at Scott Janish's book, The New IPA, that came out, and I think like maybe 2018, 2019. It is not an old book, but it's actually already dated. Just because the kind of the research and the world of thiols is evolving so quickly, or has evolved so quickly. So understand that, in who knows, and maybe in 6 months this webinar will be obsolete because there's new like thiol products out there. But largely, this is kind of a very broad statement, but there's three important thiols for purposes of brewing. The first is going to be 4-MMP. So that's going to be that black currant, passion fruit, cat urine. And the interesting thing about 4-MMP is that the context of how you're introduced to these flavors is important. And I say that because, you look at like, oh, on one hand it's black currant, on the other hand it's cat pee. Those are weird things to smell the same way. And actually, Dr. Bill Simpson from Aroxa tells a story about a time he gave everyone in the room had a sample with 4-MMP in it. He told half the room that they had a black currant spike. He told the other half of the room that they had a cat pee spike. It's the exact same. They both have 4-MMP. And then did like a hedonic poll, and the people who had the black currant, they loved it. This was this is, smells so good. People with cat pee were like, boo, this is cat pee. Right. So it's the context is important. Also an important reminder about how powerful language can be when we're talking about, our descriptive language. So our next one is going to be 3SH, 3MH. You will see it both ways. That's going to give us some grapefruit, some passion fruit. And then we have 3MHA. We're also going to have passion fruit, guava, gooseberry. So you can see, right, we've got some really tropical flavors that are in these polyfunctional thiols. And our thiols can originate in hops or malt, and they are classified. So our thiols are even further classified as either free state or bound form. So in a free state, as you would probably guess, the thiol aromatics are released when they're introduced to the beer, and that's going to be introduced to the beer via late hopping or dry hopping, because remember what we said with the last slide, these are going to be very volatile compounds. So they're, if they're in the boil, they're going to boil away. You're not going to get these thiols in your resulting beer. So you're going to add it to during late hopping or dry hopping. Bound thiols, on the other hand, have to be released, and their bound thiols are going to be released via an enzyme called beta lyase. And we can break down our thiols into free and bound. We can break down our bound thiols into either glutathione bound thiols or cysteine bound thiols. And it's I keep saying it's interesting. I just find beer interesting, but with our glutathione bound thiols, those make up about 90% of the thiols that you can find in both hops and malt. And our cysteine bound thiols are going to make up, obviously, about 10% of the bound thiols. And that's going to be important to keep in mind. So, like I mentioned, beta amylase is the enzyme that we need to free these bound thiols. And beta lyase is encoded in a gene called the IRC7 gene. And it's beta lyase is commonly found in wine yeast. And that's actually in Scott Janish's book, The New IPA. He talks about using wine yeast to release bound thiols. Luckily, we have products now that can do that for us. We'll get to those in just a second. But some strange strains of brewer's yeast may have the gene necessary, but it's been disabled due to mutations, right? Because this is something that we haven't needed. And there are the strains that do have a functional IRC7 gene kind of run into another roadblock, and that's that the gene can't create that enzyme in wort because the wort's nitrogen levels are too high. So, we don't have, it's like we can get these thiols with wine yeast, but we can, if we're using brewer's yeast, if it has that gene that we need, it probably doesn't work. If it does work, it can't work in wort. So if brewer's yeast don't have this gene and we need to free these bound thiols, then how do we extract them? So we extract them using thiol boosting products. So the first one we'll talk about is going to be Phantasm. And there's currently two ways to boost thiols in beer: Phantasm and thiolized yeast. There's a picture of Phantasm. So Phantasm was created by Garage Project in New Zealand. That's a brewery in New Zealand. And it is a powder. It's a patented thiol precursor powder. So it's derived from Sauvignon Blanc grape skins that are from the Marble region of New Zealand. And those specific grape skins have a higher thiol concentration than hops and malt. So our Phantasm is going to contain precursors that are going to convert to 3MH and 3MHA, right? So we're going to have those flavors we're looking for. Once we free those thiols, we're going to have passion fruit, we're going to have guava, we're going to have grapefruit. And you typically want to add Phantasm to the whirlpool because it must be active, or it must be present during active fermentation to be able to do those conversions. And one of the things I actually love that the founder or the creator of Phantasm has said is, like, the Phantasm is an additive. It's not a replacement. So, you may, yes, be using less hops because if you're also using Phantasm because you're getting more of those intense fruity thiols from it, but it's not intended to replace hops. It's intended to be an additive. So then our next one we have is thiolized yeast, and it is worth noting that Omega Yeast owns the copyright to thiolize. So other yeast companies have different names for their yeast. So you may see it as called like thiol releasing or something like that. So Omega's thiolized yeast is the steam beer of the fermentation world, right? And all the others are just California commons. So just keep that in mind, but for simplicity, I'm going to just use the term thiolized yeast to cover all of our thiol releasing yeast strains. So thiolized yeast is going to enhance the yeast's ability to biotransform those compounds that are found in malt and hops they're going to convert them to free state thiols via biotransformation. And a couple of levers that brewers can use to manipulate your thiol aroma is going to include using hops with high amounts of bound thiols, and then also experimenting with different base malts. And a lot of you may know I'm from the malt world. I have a very soft spot for malt. So anytime like malt kind of gets to be the star of the show, I'm very happy about it. So barley actually contains a lot of bound 3SH, and lower kilned malts seem to have higher levels of these bound thiols and or thiol precursors. And I actually kind of asked around, like, hey, is anybody doing research just on, malt and the thiols found in malt, and why would the lower kilned malts be higher? But then I kind of thought about it, and this is just my reasoning. I think that it makes sense because our thiols are going to be part of those sulfur-containing hydrocarbons, and so they're going to fall into that same category of other sulfur-based compounds like DMS. And if you're familiar with DMS, it is also prevalent in very lightly kilned malts. And it's because its precursor, SMM, or sometimes you'll see it as DMSP, is very heat sensitive. So the longer a malt is kilned, the more SMM is driven away. And so that, once I kind of linked those two together in my mind, I was like, okay, I can see how that makes sense, that malt that hasn't been kilned very long is going to have higher levels. So we have two categories of biotransformation. The first one is conversion of aroma compounds. We're not talking about that today. We're talking about the second one. The second category of biotransformation is releasing bound aroma compounds from precursor forms. So the thiolized yeast falls into the second category because we're using it to release those bound form thiols. As I mentioned, the beta lyase is going to be our enzyme that's responsible for converting bound thiols to free thiols. And currently there are two types of yeast available to brewers that are two types of thiolized yeast. So the first one is going to be yeast with that IRC7 gene activated. And so that's going to be yeast that will have beta lyase because their IRC gene is activated. The second one is going to be yeast with beta lyase from the inclusion of PAT-B. And PAT-B is a gene that it's actually a bacterial lyase, and it's derived from S. hominis bacteria. So we actually have PAT-B on our skin. It helps protect our microbiome. So those are going to be the two different kinds of thiolized yeast that is on the market now. In 2 weeks, there might be something completely different. So a limitation of yeast that rely on that IRC7 gene is that IRC7 can only work on cysteine-bound thiols. So you'll recall from earlier, cysteine-bound thiols account for about 10% of our bound thiols, right? So it's not very much. And it's, again, this is kind of where my mind sort of gets blown, because remember that we started out talking about our hop oils, which are going to create, are going to have about 0.5% to 3% of the total hop mass are those hop oils. And then within those hop oils, these sulfur containing hydrocarbons make up less than 1% of that, like 0.5%. So that should, help kind of bring it into focus about how low our sensory thresholds are for these thiols. And especially if you've had a beer that's had like phantasm and thiolized yeast in it, like these are very intense flavors. And it just comes from just this little bitty bit. So these compounds are going to be highly aromatic. And with our yeast that have that thiolize via our bacterial PAT-B, it's going to be more active than IRC7, and it can free glutathione-bound thiols directly without needing to convert them to cysteine-bound thiols. And again, remembering that our glutathione our glutathione-bound thiols are going to make up about 90% of bound thiols. So being able to convert that 90% directly is awesome, right? You're going to get like all like that's just this huge punch in the face of thiols. So the thiol output, if you're using a yeast, a thiolized yeast with that PAT-B gene, is going to be much more intense than what you're going to get with a yeast that's using beta lyase via that IRC7 gene. And so this is where mash hopping comes in. And it's funny because I have been like on and off trying to kind of hunt down why like mash hopping used to be a thing in Germany, because I would just read it, in one book, and I would look at its reference, and I would go to that book, and that book just referenced the first book. But now with our thiolization that we can do, mash hopping is back, baby. And this makes a lot more sense to me. So if you're using mash hopping in combination with using thiolized yeast, that's going to increase the amount of your 3-MH thiol precursors. So malt has high levels of glutathione-bound 3-SH. And when we're mashing, during our mashing regimen, that helps those enzymes that are present helps convert some of those glutathione-bound 3-SH thiols to cysteine-bound 3-SH. I should be saying thiol precursors. So both IRC7 and PAT-B can convert the cysteine-bound precursors to 3-SH. So that's going to increase the amount of the perceived aromas of passion fruit and grapefruit. And those MASH enzymes are going to work the best on doing those conversions in that like acid protein temperature rest range. So if you're doing like an acid rest, and of course like your acid rest and your protein rest overlap a little bit, doing that acid rest is where you're going to get that conversion of your glutathione bound precursors to cysteine bound precursors. And so then once we have it cysteine bound, if you're using that IRC7 gene or yeast that has that in it, then you have created, a lot more of these cysteine bound precursors that the IRC7 can then break down, and then you've got your thiols. So one thing I wanted to note when it comes to thiolized yeast is that some yeast companies will use CRISPR technology to genetically modify their yeast strains, while others will use techniques such as like yeast hybridization to create their strains. And it's not a value judgment on my part. I'm just noting that in genetically modified products are illegal in a lot of countries like the UK, France, Germany, India, Russia. So that's just something kind of note. You're not going to be able to use thiolized yeast in France. And I won't go through this each one, but I did put this little chart together with hops that are high in thiols. So if you're wanting to maximize your thiols and you're using this thiolized yeast, it makes sense then that you would want to use hops that are high in those thiols, right? You don't want to waste your time and money on a hop that's not very high in thiols because you're just not going to get that much. And you can see that Citra and Cascade both have high levels of all three thiols. And I think that's pretty cool. And I was also surprised to see even some German hops on here, like Saaz, Mandarina Bavaria. But there's, particularly in Scott Janish's book, he's got like lists and lists of hops that are high in 4-MMP, etc. But when we're talking about wanting to kind of maximize your thiols in your beer, these would be hops that would be good to go with. And you can see also when I mentioned like different levers you can pull. Let's say that you really like 4-MMP and 3-MHA, but you hate the aroma of 3-SH. Then you can use Saaz hops, right? So just a little quick chart to show you some of these hop varieties that would work for our thiolization. So then the last source I'm going to discuss today is specific to one of our tropical fruit aromas, coconut. So I wanted to make sure we covered it because it is possible to get some coconut aromas from certain types of hops, but we arguably encounter coconut flavors most often in barrel-aged beers. And that's because in barrel-aged beer, specifically oak, specifically American oak, Oak lactones are responsible for the coconut flavor that you're going to find in a barrel-aged beer. And so there are 5 basic groups of flavor compounds that are going to be present in our oak barrels. The first is going to be vanillin, and it may shock you to know that that's going to produce vanilla. We have our lactones, which are going to give us coconut aromas. We have furfurols, which is going to be responsible for butter, caramel, kind of that like kind of cooked sugar sort of aroma. Then you have eugenol and isoeugenol. Those are going to be responsible for the clove, spice flavors that you're going to find in a barrel aged beer. And then the last is guaiacol. Guaiacol is going to produce that smoke and char flavor. And of course, that's going to depend on what your char level is. But those are the 5 main kind of compounds that you're going to find in barrel aged beers. Lactones is one of them. And they're described as having a creamy flavor. And it actually, the reading a lot of the descriptions will say like, oh, a lactone smells creamy, and it drives me insane because creamy is more of a mouthfeel. It's like saying something smells sweet. It's like sweet as it tastes. Not that I'm going to well actually anyone to death, but lactones are described as having that creamy flavor. And most often you're going to encounter them in coconut, or you're going to get coconut aromas or peach aromas. So just a little bit about lactones, and I guess a little hint about one of the flavors that you have in front of you. So the next thing we're going to do is our second blind smelling exercise. And this time everything's going to be the same. I believe if you just hit refresh on that tasting form, it should refresh for you, so you've got a whole new form. I'm only going to give you 3 minutes this time instead of 5 because we've already been exposed to these once. And one thing I would also do, and I meant to mention this at the beginning too, before we did the first blind smelling exercise, just take a second and kind of swap your vials around so you're not tasting them in the same order. That's going to help train your brain. And also, it's kind of cheating. Like if you're like, I'm pretty sure I know what this one is. So just mix them up a little bit so you don't see, or you don't have the exact same order as last time. And so just make sure when you're finished that you hit submit. And then when we're at the end of the 3 minutes, I will tell you which aromas are in which files. So very suspenseful. And I'm going to let you all get started. 3 minutes. I want you to go through your blind smelling, smell all of your vials again. Just repeat the exact same exercise we did at the beginning. You finishing up with your second blind smelling exercise. Hopefully it was a little bit easier than the first one. If nothing else, you have at least encountered these aromas earlier today, so that might kind of perk something up in your brain. So now, the moment you've been waiting for, we're going to do the flavor reveal. And before I do this, again, we're looking for progress, not perfection. I don't want you to think of your performance as good or bad. We don't need to apply any hedonics to it. What we're gathering is data points. We're doing dynamic testing, so we're getting those data points that's going to help us focus where we go. And you'll receive a copy of these slides, but I encourage you to keep a running key, particularly if you're doing more than one of the aroma series, and not label your vials in any way. And I'll have like a running key available to you all as well. But doing that is going to like making sure that you're not writing anything or distinguishing your vials from each other. Then you've got these vials. You can continue to blind train on all of them without biasing yourself in some way. So all of that said, data points. So our first one is sample 494. That one is coconut. And I think, it's actually funny. I forgot which, all of which aromas that I put on here. So even I going through was like, what fruit is this? And like could not remember. But coconut I got. I was pretty proud of that one. So the next one, sample 163, is guava. And guava was one of the ones that I was just like, I have no idea what this is. Our next one, sample 349, is mango. Our next one is 622, that's papaya. And then our last one, or sorry, our next to last one, 739, passion fruit. And then our last one is 155, pineapple. And I have to check mine and see how well I did too. So like I said, you'll get a copy of this, so you'll have access to which number or which vial is which aroma. But yeah, just try not to like write anything on the vial, so you can just continue to use these. And particularly, I mean, if you do more, as you do more of these webinars, you're going to get a lot more vials. So pretty soon you're going to have yourself a nice little collection of vials that you can train yourself on. So, as most of you know, at any time I do a presentation, these are the sources that I use. One of my sources is actually here tonight. That would be Shayna. Thank you, Shayna, for your Choose Your Own Adventure article about files. But these are all of the sources that I use to help me prepare for tonight. And I'll leave that up. And if you all, let's do some questions, if anybody has any questions. And I do see one from Shayna, but it looks like it was context specific. So if anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and pop them into that chat. If nobody has questions, I'll give everybody a couple more seconds. I can vamp for a little bit longer than that. Okay, the list of hops with thiols. Thank you. So going back to our list of thiols. So these are going to be hops with high level of, and I just put thiols because some of these are going to be bound, some are going to be free. And there is literature out there that will tell you a little bit better, obviously, than I can off the top of my head, like, is the 3-MHA and Cascade free or bound? So this kind of just covers thiols as a whole. All right, other questions while I get back to my side of sources. All right, I am seeing none. I'm clicking the next slide, which is my last slide. So if you've got a question, you can get it in now. And if you think of a question afterward, of course, you're always welcome to email me, Jen at underthegenfluence.beer. or you can reach out to me on social media under the Genfluence. I also have a contact me form on my website. So lots of ways that you can get in touch with me. Like I like to tell people, you can trust I'm very protective of my time. So I will tell you if you're asking me too many questions or bothering me or anything like that. I haven't told anybody that yet, and I say that just so you know, like, don't think, oh, I can't reach out. She doesn't really mean that. I do mean that. Any kind of questions you have, just let me know. So to wrap up, all of you will receive a follow-up email. It's going to have a link to this recording. You'll have access to that for 30 days. And I have it on the kind of the FAQ page that you all got, hopefully got to with your little QR code. Uh, if, 2 months down the road, you think like, oh man, I know there was something about thiols that Jen said, again, just email me and ask like, hey, can I have access to that recording again? Can I have those slides again? Whatever, it's fine. But you'll have access, like unfettered access to this recording for 30 days. I will also include a way that you can give me feedback. Let me know what you think about the format. If you have suggestions for topics you'd like to learn more about, let me know that as well. I have a few ideas in mind for kind of future like little like side quest sensory things. But if there's something you would like to know more about, just let me know. And if you enjoy this webinar, I hope you did, please also consider writing me a brief testimonial because I would love to be able to feature some testimonials, on the website, in the marketing, so people understand a little bit more what we're doing. And truly with the feedback, if you have good, bad, negative, give me the feedback you have. It's really important to me that you all find a lot of value in these webinars. So I want to make sure that I'm delivering everything in a way that is valuable for you. So our next webinar is going to be Tropical 2, Electric Boogaloo, and it's going to be on Tuesday, February 25th at 8 p.m. And the deadline for full registration, so when I say full registration, that's, for me to be able to get the vials to you on time, the deadline for the full registration is Tuesday, February 18th. So it's a week ahead of time. So with that, I see all of your comments. Thank you so much for attending. I'm really happy that you all enjoyed it. Like I said, always feel free to reach out. I hope I will see you all next month for Tropical 2. And I hope you all have a great night. Thank you.